Hi, I'm Will.
And I'm Luke.
And this is Will and Luke Discuss,
a vodcast
and podcast
where we discuss content related to psychology,
personal growth,
self-development,
and well-being. This episode, we're discussing
The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. It was published in 2012, and the subtitle is The Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results.
Yeah, so it falls into kind of the productivity, life hacks, aligning your values and your daily actions with your bigger goals and next action steps. And I think, definitely this ties into a lot of the other podcasts we've done, things around, getting things done, atomic habits in particular stood out to me as well.
Yeah, so the book's in 3 parts. It's got a little intro, and then part 1, The Lies, where it kind of talks about all the, cultural assumptions and beliefs that are stumbling blocks for us, that dissuade us from the key concept they're trying to get across in the book, the one thing. And part 2 covers The Truth, which is the simple path to productivity, where it really gets into the theory of this idea of honing your focus on one thing at a time. And then part 3 covers more of the actual implementation, like how to put this stuff into practice.
Cool. Well, I reckon I'd be really interested this week to kind of go through those 3 sections kind of relatively swiftly, try and cover that at the beginning, and then just kind of get a bit stuck into some personal examples and how we've applied some of this. I think something we've reflected on that we kind of just want to kind of get stuck into it, and then do that. So maybe we just start with part 1, The Lies, or
we could cover the key concept, the one thing.
I reckon that's even better idea.
So people know what the hell we're talking about.
yeah. Do that now.
Shall I give it a crack, and then you help fill me in?
Yeah, then we'll crack on with the content.
The more I read, it almost became slightly less obvious over time, really, what he means by the one thing. Yeah. But from what I gather, we spread our attention too thinly, generally, over too many things. And by kind of putting our eggs in multiple baskets, we end up achieving less overall. And actually, if we want to get really good and succeed at something, it's best to hone in on at least one project at a time, and within that project to hone in on what is the very next task I need to do to achieve the next goal, to achieve this overall project, which is in line with some overall value. So it's like setting a single path on what's most important to you and what you most want in life, so you're not sort of scattershot everywhere. I think where I got slightly confused later is how this then can apply to like all the different areas of your life. And then suddenly you've got one things in this area, one thing in this area, and it's so it becomes more than one thing by the end. But the general idea is, if you focus your attention down on one priority, one project, one goal, one task within that goal, then you're much more likely to achieve that sort of sequential success than jumping from thing to thing.
Yeah, he says, if we kind of try and do everything at once, or we try and do too many things, we end up actually doing nothing. So it's kind of, that whole concept of spreading yourself too thin. And what he's saying is it's about, going small, ignoring the things that aren't important, and really like honing down on what's the one thing you can be doing right now that kind of moves you towards your bigger goal. Like in any given moment, there is, we can really only do one thing at a time. Right. And, what really deciding and building up a habit and having the wisdom of knowing what that exact one thing is that you should be doing next to move you towards that goal. And that one thing, I guess something we'll get into later, that one thing serves, the best thing you could be doing that week, which serves the one thing you want to do that month, which serves the one thing you want to do this year. In 5 years, and that kind of someday goal is kind of just having that big picture thinking he talks about, narrowing it down to the small in the moment action that you can do, and what is the best thing you can do, and how we deviate from that. And I guess kind of that goes into the lies. He says the ways we feel like multiple things are important at the same time. So
that fits. That sits well. So the idea that what we're doing right now, this action we're doing, it in some way we have planned for it to align with our big goals, our higher values, and I suppose that gives us a sense of purpose, meaning. Yeah. So what stood out to you in the lies section in the
lies? I think
perhaps we can fall into.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I guess the one that stood out to me is everything matters equally. So we kind of can feel that when we've got multiple things going on at the same time, everything starts to feel urgent and important, and therefore kind of if we treat everything as equal, we become busy and not productive. And I know these are concepts we've covered before, certainly in the Tony Robbins Time of Your Life program. He talks about like trying to do things, that are in the kind of urgent, but important, but not urgent is like where the most fulfilling activities of life come in. And I think this is kind of telling us to like go from a clear sense of priority about like what is the most productive thing at any point. And he says to go extreme, like your day should be driven by the most important things, and using your motivation like wisely, and the willpower that you have within you at certain times of day in the most like tactical directed way possible.
And so on that point, he's saying that like, there are studies that demonstrate we have a finite amount of willpower each day, and it just declines over the day. So like whatever your most important thing is, do that first. Or at least really try to fit that first into your life. And I definitely resonated with this, especially I've been really influenced by the David Allen's Getting Things Done system. Like since we implemented that, I've just continued running that program, and and it does mean my inbox just throws me my to-dos each day, but they are certainly not equal. But they appear equal because they're all on the same list, right? And it's really easy to fall into the what's tastiest on this? What will give me the quickest dopamine hit? But I can tick that off dead quick. I'll do that one first, and then I'll do that, and then I'll do that. And by the end, it's like, I've got all the horrible stuff I really don't want to do. But actually, if I was thinking smartly with my willpower, I would do that stuff first when I'm freshest in the day. And like by the end of the day, when I'm kind of depleted and tired, all the simple mindless admin would be much easier to do then than like starting some creative writing or something like that.
Yeah, and he says, in the morning, I guess he has like a bit of a bias towards like the mornings when you're most productive. And so he says in the morning, be a maker, in the afternoon, be a manager. And I think it's certainly, this is something I certainly think about is like, how do I, because there's a list of things that I'd like to get done. So like next action steps, some of those things are simply errands. Other things are more things directed towards a goal that I'm particularly interested in. That's like a writing project or some area of learning I want to do. And I'm trying at the moment, something I'm trying to do is like block out an hour in the evening that I leave entirely free to give 100% attention to whatever that one thing is that day. And so if the one thing happens to be like, I've actually got like 5 small menial tasks to do, that kind of are probably like admin related, but it'd be really good if I got them done because they're not going to be hanging over me, then I might use the hour for that. Whereas if I'm kind of feeling motivated about a particular area of learning, I might kind of focus in on that for an hour. And I think that's a little bit different to what necessarily he's saying, but I guess it also incorporates like the time pockets you have. If you've got like 10 minutes on a train, like what's a good use of that time? And I guess I'm confusing the messages here by kind of explaining my personal dilemma with it. But I guess it does get you thinking about like, how do you use the most like productive free time you have? So if you've got like 2 hours in the evening, how do you use that time? Or like, are you better off doing that more difficult task in the morning? Like, how do you fit those things into your day? I mean, obviously, like his ideal is saying, do it, block out important time in the morning when you have the most willpower. But of course, like he does mention that, well, for a lot of people with the types of jobs they have and the lifestyles they have, that's just not really that's just not going to fit with their current lifestyle, at least. So I suppose similarly to deep work, it's like find somewhere you can lock out time for yourself. I think It's a really good, I think the first part of the book's really interesting because it gets you thinking about kind of what are the, what's kind of like a maintenance habit versus what's a kind of a habit of action towards areas of your life you want to work on. So I think about, my morning routine, like there's a lot that goes on in the morning that serves, my health. Yeah. Serves like my mental well-being, serves like, I guess, multiple areas of health, I suppose. And, kind of gets me set up for the day and everything's kind of organized and like ready to go. But like that doesn't necessarily serve kind of other, say like learning goals or writing goals or
it's
travel goals, it's like it kind of falls into that area. And I guess that's something we've been talking about is like, how do we kind of use those? How do we kind of use that time towards more meaningful goals rather than things that are just kind of like day-to-day maintenance?
Yeah, well, I think it's helpful
to separate
firstly
the two,
just to clarify the difference, right? Because obviously, like he even has a chapter in the book about that, or at least a part of a chapter about like, you need to look after yourself, like success, like pursuing a long-term project or a value is, a marathon, not a sprint, as they say. So like looking after your health and your mental energy is kind of vital. So, but that is a really interesting topic. The idea of like what habits and goals are we kind of putting in place just to maintain ourselves, to maintain our sanity, our health, our energy, our relationships. And then what stuff's actually, I don't know, to produce something, to have an outcome that you can eventually tick off. That's a project, that's something that's not just like, I want to keep my cardiovascular fitness good for the rest of my life or have a certain diet.
Yeah. Well, what did you think about the lie about a balanced life? He says there's no such thing as a work-life balance because we're constantly balancing. Like he's saying, we need to
that was the hardest one to get my head around. Okay, I'll save it to. So he's got everything matters equally, which we've covered. So certainly not everything matters equally, and it's really easy to get caught in that trap of the lists on your to-dos all feel equal when they're just not. Some things have a much bigger impact on your goals than others. He talks about multitasking, which like the myth of trying to do more than one thing at once. A disciplined life, he says that we don't need really more discipline because we just need to use the discipline we already have in the most important areas. And actually, people who look like they have a lot of discipline have actually just implemented habits. And although it takes discipline to implement a habit, once it's up and running, like it doesn't really take discipline to maintain.
Well, maybe that's kind of what we're talking about around our maintenance habits. Like those things are now like locked in, like we've kind of locked in our morning routines and our evening routines. So it looks like we're disciplined, but actually it just becomes a non-negotiable part of the day. Like it feels weirder not to do that morning routine.
Yeah, that's what you hopefully want to get to. And he makes the case, he says there's some research that suggests that 66 days is the cutoff point for establishing a new habit, which is slightly counter to the usual narrative. I think 21 days, but the general idea being that like there's a certain time, if you just keep pursuing, there's a certain cutoff point where that habit will start basically maintaining itself. After which you can start building more on top of it. Okay, so I've avoided your question. So the balanced life, he was saying that people look for a work-life balance, and that can be a trap. And I think that what I got from that chapter was, in your personal life, it's best not to let anything drop for any significant of time. Because if you let a relationship drop for months, it's kind of damaged and you've got to do repair work, right?
To go back to it, kind of deviating from that center line.
So if you let relationships drop, if you let diet drop, if you let exercise drop, those kind of need constant small chipping away at. Whereas he makes the case in work life, if we should pursue our one thing and just let all the other shit drop, and then yes, we might have this sort of mess of admin to pick up later, but if the trap is that if that becomes this thing we feel we have to constantly stay on top of, we can avoid ever getting around to the stuff that the and the non-urgent but important quadrant stuff is actually the most important to us. So he says, rather than finding a balance between the two, sort of keep on at your personal life, don't let those things drop, and then in your work life, pursue your one thing and let all the menial stuff just drop, and you'll pick it up later.
I think he's saying sort of like time. He says time away from one thing means like balance becomes impossible. Like if we take a significant amount of time to go and like deepen in one area of our lives, like that's going to mean that another area of our life kind of suffers. But if we try and give equal time to everything, we like shortchange ourselves. Like we're not able to kind of do everything at once. And I guess that's kind of like an attitudinal shift that like, I can't. And I guess what one thing that stood out to me is like, it's going to be difficult to maintain an absolutely immaculate home environment if I'm spending like my spare time after work, like doing this one thing, particularly, or like if I entirely like dedicate myself to my work, it could be very difficult to like get up early every morning to go to the gym and stuff. Like I guess there's sort of what he's saying is that like there is inevitably going to be a degree of like take when you focus on like another area of your life. And I think that's something maybe I've noticed in kind of, trying to do some like big habit stacking or trying to do like too many things at once. Like I want to work on all these multiple areas of your life, but it can be difficult to do them all at once, like, and to do them all deeply and to do them all properly. To the best of their ability to maximize like the goal you set yourself.
I think that's a fair way of putting it, isn't it? Like the idea that you'll get all your areas of life and be doing them all to your best of your abilities, a myth. And I don't know, if we took exercise an example, you don't want to let it drop because you need it to sustain you, obviously. But like, I could imagine either of us could go down a rabbit hole of exercise where we start planning these like big routines we want to do to hit these exercise goals, and it just will require a lot more time exercising. Like, if that is your one thing right now and that's what you're into, then like more power to you. But don't expect to have that same attitude with everything in your life. Like it might be the case that, if you go for you do your stretches and a few press ups and you go for a jog a few times a week, then maybe that's just fine for you. So you can concentrate on your one thing, but like, don't expect yourself to go big on every area.
I think it's actually this is like a big part of the book in terms of, something that kind of impacted my thinking. I guess there is that tendency for me to like, I kind of want to do everything all at once and do it all very well. Like I want to kind of, and when you set your goals in life areas, you kind of, especially in the Tony Robbins book, saying, like,
that was very much go big on everything.
Go big on everything. And it's like, how do you manage that? Like I've noticed like when I'm going particularly, and you would know, because you've kind of joined a gym club thing, and I'm sure it takes time to get there. And it's kind of got the, and it's got the
it's half a mile down the road, mate.
But when I know, like if the gym's got like a sauna and a steam room, and then you kind of like want to go there and do like, your 20 minutes stretching at the beginning, and you want to go do like a big long 1 hour workout and then maybe go to a yoga class afterwards. Like I've gotten into that before where I've just, it's kind of taken over like a massive part of my life. It's kind of becomes half your day or half your morning routine. And it's like, oh, well, that like now I'm finding I start work at 9 o'clock as opposed to 8 o'clock because I've just started a new job. And I find I've kind of got this like half an hour, 45 minutes in the morning, sort of free now. And I'm like, if I sort of like shorten my workout a little bit, and then I've kind of got half an hour in the morning where I could like do another project or work on something else. And I guess I guess my point is that like, you can't expect to do everything at length. I guess it's kind of implying that there is time, like time is involved in doing things deeply. And, with deep work as well. And I guess that, what we talked about in deep
resources, willpower, energy.
All those sorts of things. It's like, how do you want to use that? Like, do you want to use it all for exercise, or do you want to use it all for something else? It's an interesting concept, I think. Yeah. Cool. Should we? I'd be interested. Just kind of for us to just kind of go to the focusing question. The kind of like the centerpiece of the whole the whole book. And I guess he's implying that, the quote to start this chapter, efficiency is doing the thing right. Effectiveness is doing the right thing. And he kind of quotes this Chinese proverb of a journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. So, the focusing question for him and for us to build into our lives is what's the one thing I can do that by doing it, everything else will be easier and unnecessary. And he's saying that this incorporates big picture and small focus right now. So it helps us kind of keep a vision and keep productive. And he says there can only be one important thing. Many things may be important, but only one thing can be the most important.
Yeah, so this is part 2, and it's kind of the key theory of the book, isn't it? The focusing question, once again, is what's the one thing I can do such by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? And so he splits this question kind of into 2. So one being the big picture and then one being the small focus. So the big picture is, well, if we take that Chinese proverb, the big picture is the 1,000-mile journey, and the small focus is what's that next step or that first step. Yeah. And you can sort of apply this question to both, like thinking, well, what's my general priorities and vision versus what's like the one next thing I can do to get closer to that. And I think that probably is a good time. He has like an intro before part 1. And in that intro, he talks about the domino effect. And it's like a metaphor, but basically a domino can knock over a domino twice its size. And so if you chain up domino after domino after domino, you can eventually, I can't remember the maths of it, but eventually like something this big can knock over like the Empire State Building. And it's like, it's a metaphor, I suppose, for the energy. If we put our energy into the right domino, into the right step, the knock-on effect that can have over time is cumulative.
I think he's kind of like this, would say it's like sequential, right? That it is sort of like success is sequential, not simultaneous. So saying like and I think that is true. Like often once you kind of get the ball rolling on something and you kind of get some momentum, like it can certainly lead to more action and more motivation to do it as well. Like you kind of see the real life changes happening, and you kind of know that it's possible as well. Like once you've, and kind of like once you, something that feels really difficult and large to do, like often once you kind of just get going on it, like often you kind of find that you can make quite a lot of progress on it if you actually apply yourself. Yeah. And then he talks about the extreme Pareto.
Yes.
the Pareto principle that I not always struggled to get my head around, but he's, kind of saying that, 80% of the results come from 20% of the efforts. And he's saying that we can kind of do that even more. Like we can kind of go
right
to the extremes. So what's 20% that drives 80% of your results? And what's the 20% of that? And then what's the 20% of that? So kind of really narrowing it down to kind of exactly what is the thing you can do in that exact moment.
Yeah.
Kind of, I think, drive everything. Yeah.
Well, I first came across the Pareto principle in the 4-hour work week, right? I think probably most people did. But yeah, the idea being that, like we discussed, that most of what you do doesn't contribute to most of your success. In fact, a very small amount of what you do contributes to the effects you actually have. And I suppose in this idea, he's saying, well, let's not just focus on even the small amount of things we do. What is the one next thing? Like, so if we keep narrowing that down, we'll eventually get to the one next thing we can do that will have the biggest impact, I suppose. So finding that next domino.
Yeah. Have you got an example of that you've kind of thought about over the past week of something you're doing and you've kind of thought, what's the exact one thing? It can get a bit as like the one thing. No. What's the one thing? The one thing. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, I can give you an example that I've avoided. So
the one thing you could have done.
So I'm doing a course at the moment, and for this course, I need to do some work placement hours. And it was part of my like project to find work placement hours. I've been working on both my like website, I suppose, so like online presence, but I can also contact contacts I have, right, and let them know I'm doing this course. Do you know anyone who'd be interested in seeing me as part of my work placement? And I'm kind of guessing that is going to have far more impact than like editing a write-up I might put online, right? But there's this part of me that's like, I really want to finish. It feels so much cleaner and like less anxiety provoking to finish that first and then approach people. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, think about like wanting to finish things before you start something else. Like, how does that fall into all this? Yeah, and actually, it's quite easy to put that off and aim for perfectionism. But actually, the days I lose through doing that is probably much less effective than like just putting myself out there and contacting people and saying, I'm looking for this. Do you know anyone? And they might not even look at the website, you know? So like,
exactly.
The thing I end up spending my time on might be more, well, at least for this particular goal, less effective than just sending some emails, making some phone calls to contacts I already have that could probably help me out. So that's the one thing I've not done.
I liked there's a lot of content in part 3 that I enjoyed. You know, he talks about how to get these extraordinary results, and I guess this is where it kind of turns into like a
jump
bit of
into part 3. Or
I reckon there's well, I guess it links a bit to like priority, I suppose, is like the part that like links to that. So we have many priorities, but there's only one thing we can do right now. It says there's an art to clearing away the clutter and focusing on what matters most. It's simple, it's transferable. It just requires courage to take a different approach. So like, I guess what stood out from what you were saying is that I could be just describing you all wrong here. I'm probably just describing myself. But like, is that like maybe like an old habit of yours could be that like, you want to finish something you've started before you start something else. Like that might be like an old way of doing things, or you feel mentally satisfied that once you've completed this, then you'll start this. But he's saying it's going to take a bit of like a rewiring to sort of like try things a different way, and like know that you could pick up that other thing you'd started another time. And I guess that's really that's where like your organization and your time management's going to be really important if you're kind of leaving a lot of important things like unfinished, understanding the time scale in which those things are going to take.
And I mean, this is just me jumping to the end of the book now, but at the end of the book, he talks about these like, I suppose, traps rather than the lies he started the book with. He ends with these sort of things that can get in the way of pursuing one thing. And one of them is not being comfortable with chaos. And I feel like the David Allen getting things done system really helps you like maintain order and completely strip away all chaos. But in doing so, you probably end up prioritizing things that aren't that important. They don't fall into your important but not urgent quadrant, right? So he's saying, well, if you're going to pursue something like that's going to be your priority and other things drop, you're going to have to find a way to feel okay with the discomfort of, for example, like you just said, leaving things half finished that are no longer your priority, or allowing things to build up that you're going to have to get to later, and just like to get that focus and tunnel vision and clear out those time blocks. Some stuff's going to have to sit there, and there's going to be a sort of discomfort with that we're going to have to learn to sit with if we want to succeed with our one thing.
I think to learn to sit that discomfort, you would need to see this working, right? You wouldn't want to just kind of like feel like there's just more chaos than results. It's just like, oh God, just like I've started all these things that I can't finish, and it's just,
my life just got more chaotic and stressful, and I can't see any benefit.
Well, he said, I think this is where he does tie in the connect today to all of your tomorrows. So it's sort of saying, what's the, what he's saying about, kind of what's the goal, right? Approach right now to, feel that one thing right now to the daily, into the weekly, into the monthly, the yearly. And I guess it's like, I'm asking this question, like, how do you decipher like what's going to be the most important thing in a week when you've got like all these different things going on, different life areas into a month and a year? Because it's kind of, well, right now it'd be really good for me to exercise, but also I've got a deadline at work. So what's like, I guess this is where it gets, I suppose, tricky when you've got the one thing in different life areas. That could be like health, work, relationships, finances, your spiritual life, all that sort of thing. It's like, how do you decide between those, like how do you pick what's the most important?
Yeah, well, he doesn't say this, but I get the impression the book is very much work focused, and it's kind of written as if you're running your own business, self-employed, and your work is your kind of will be where your one thing is. The reason I say that is because, so he talked in the part 3 of how to implement this stuff. He talks about purpose, priority, and productivity. And I think it's in the productivity bit, he talks about this time blocking, which we discussed in Deep Work. But his advice is to, after you've kind of done your morning routine, block out your first 4 hours of the day to concentrate on your one thing. I was like, okay, so implicitly that has to be your job, because unless you don't have a job or you're working really part-time, you can't do 4 hours every morning on this one project or work. So although he doesn't really say it, he's sort of implying that you probably aren't employed and your one thing is your work. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then anyone else would have to sort of fit this to their own circumstances. But it's really engineered, I think, towards someone who's running their own business or it's self-employed in some way. So I get the impression by having these time blocks with your one thing, he's saying like, block out 4 hours a day for what really is your priority. And then the afternoon can be used for the more admin-y managerial stuff. And then I suppose everything else around that is where you fit in your exercise, relationships, and whatnot.
I guess so. Here's kind of like a personal example of how I'm trying to manage this. So I've started a new job where I simply can't, for the most part, block out specific time to do specific things. Like there could be like a meeting in which like I'm seeing a client between 10 and 11, and then I'm seeing someone between 2 and 3. Like those are things where I'm there, I'm present. That's what I've got to do. And then within those is like priorities. But then outside of that, there'll be like, case noting, phone calls, admin, responding to other people's admin, like I guess kind of a work distractions, but that are kind of like important to the running of the team and the work and what needs to be done essentially. Like
the admin.
There's inevitable reaction. Like the phone will go. Like if I'm in the middle of doing a case note, like the phone could go and it could be a client.
And I suppose this is getting down to your personal circumstance, but are you sort of contracted for your phone to be on loud during that time? Because a Tim Ferriss thing would be like, get the blinkers on, like cut out distractions and don't allow yourself to have your phone on, your emails on, to be contactable during certain.
Well, I guess a limit. I guess this is all like early days actually of this. So I guess I'll report back at some point, but I've kind of, like turn off emails so I don't get like email notifications popping up on the screen. I won't get texts coming through, but I'll get calls. So I guess I've put limits on it in that sense. It's kind of like I need inverted commas potentially like to be responsive, but also like I need to be responsive to like the more urgent things. Like if this request from somebody doesn't need doing right now, then the most important thing for me to be doing is kind of like finishing that note or attending something. And I guess this is where it gets really tricky when you have a job that is like inherently constant unclosed loops. Just like there's endless unclosed loops. So that's that. I'm putting it out there. I guess I'll throw this all at you and you just kind of throw back what you think. And then outside of that, I guess I've been putting in some like habits and structures, and I'm communicating with my partner about this. Like when I come home, like there's obviously like, dinner and kind of unpack things and just kind of sort a couple of things out. And then I've kind of trying to block out between 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock is that hour I was talking about to you earlier. Where it's like, that is an hour of deep, undistracted time.
Yeah.
But then after 8 o'clock till bed is like time that I keep. It might be used for something else. Like if I decide I want to carry on the thing I'm doing, but it's like, it's time available for like my relationship, my friendships.
Yeah. You're contactable.
I'm contactable. Like I'm available physically, to go and like see a friend or like to spend time with my partner, like watch TV or something, or, like I'm more like emotionally available, but in those, like in that hour, I'm trying to do what he says here is like time block things off. And like he said, he says like, just do no interruptions, like don't budge, and like navigate high level requests if they come through.
Right.
And I suppose that's kind of where like, if, it's also kind of people around you learning that like that you're just not free at that time.
Yeah.
I think we've in our friendship as well, we've sort of, we kind of book in times for like longer phone calls that might require, kind of deeper thought, emotion, like they're a bit more kind of personal, as opposed to like, I don't expect to be able to kind of contact you on a whim about anything,
I think that's part of the nature of living.
Anyway, I'll throw that all at you.
Living on different sides of the planet, kind of navigate, like almost forces us to do that in a way. But it's almost a good practice, right? That we have to do that for this kind of thing. Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts on like two separate, but like obviously time blocking in your personal life to do things that are like yours, and then obviously being in a work environment that sort of a bit choppy, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I suppose like with this and deep work, that neither of them are saying, obviously they're not saying like never be contactable, like always be on your own terms. Like they're saying find some time where that's the case. They're not saying, never be living in open loops, jumping from one thing to one thing, because some things do get urgent, right? But I think this is more important in this kind of I suppose generation we're in with the technology we have, where I think he used in the book an example of a dairy farmer. It's kind of like you don't clock at 5, you clock off when the cows are milked, and like it's project focus. It's not time focus. Like you're done when your project's done. You're not done because of some arbitrary time. And I just suppose that had me think that before all this technology we now have, so much of our boundaries would have been set for us. Like you only get mail once a day. Your phone is pinned to your wall. If you're not in the house, you can't hear it. Like, you can't be texted, and it's everything, all these boundaries that feel like we have to make a conscious effort now to put in would have just been there by default. I forgot why I'm saying all this, but
keep going.
Okay.
It's pretty
so
interesting.
In terms of you blocking out, I think that's what I'm saying. This can sound kind of like, I can imagine people shrugging at this kind of stuff and being like, oh, that's kind of, square or something. But like, I think we're forced into this by the nature of the times we now live in. It's not that like this would have been advice for someone 50 years ago. I don't think it would have really mattered then. I think it's something we now have to be more conscious about, because we're so otherwise everyone else will be making these decisions for us, right? And we will always be accessible, distractible, etc. So
that's it. I think it's true. I think people are I've kind of noticed, sort of if someone's got their phone on at the table at dinner or something, and then it pings, everyone's eyes go towards it. It's like, what on earth could that text be about that's more important than like this like current friendship you have at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, like this moment you're sharing with that person, you know, kind of, I guess the one thing I know what you mean is kind of slightly angled towards like, I guess, productivity in like a work sense or doing some sort of project or something. But I think this is really applicable to like your personal encounters and your relationships and you know, and it's like, what's the one most important thing in that moment is to like pay full attention and to like deepen that connection and to like listen to what's going on and provide support, as opposed to kind of like, you know, like I think, and then, you know, if you're spending time with someone and you only see that person for 2 hours every 3 months, it's like, well, you know, what's the one thing you could be doing in that? So I do like how applicable this is to, relationships and friendships.
Yeah.
That area of life as well, family life and things, especially if you've got goals around contacting these people or quality time or deepening the connection.
Yeah. I suppose that's so in the part 3, in the practice part of this book, like I said, he talks about purpose, priority, and productivity. And I suppose the purpose is really the big kind of values-based questions. What would David Allen would probably call it? He changed it in the second edition, like the 40,000 feet, Horizon 5 or whatever it is. Like that's when you're really high up looking at the overall structure of your life, like what's kind of most important. And I suppose this whole book is about using that and zoning down right to the present moment and being like, well, given that, what's most important right now? And so in those cases you're talking about, like engaging with someone in your personal life is going to be more, you're going to feel, well, probably, depending on your values, better for that than building the habit of being constantly responsive to texts or something.
Yeah. I think what he says in the Live with Purpose, the quote I think just sums up what you said is, you know, when our daily actions fulfill our bigger purpose is when we are most happy.
Right. Yeah. That makes so much sense, doesn't it?
Yes. And I'll be interested to kind of hear, and suppose people to hear sort of, you left me a voicemail earlier on in the week, just talking about the, your thinking around, kind of how kind of having your one thing in each life area, kind of, you can make that a daily habit of moving you towards like bigger and better goals. I know we spoke a bit about like maintenance goals versus more. I'm wondering like what you think kind of on reflection from this book you can do to like prioritize the things that are kind of moving you towards like your biggest dreams and your biggest goals. On a daily basis, or whether you thought further about that.
Well, it's something I'm still, I think, battling with. So I'll spitball ideas. So the basic premise is that, building habits is really important, right? As we've talked about, not just in this book, but habits can really, make things flow. Once they're built in, it requires less willpower. But I've been becoming more aware, as we talked about, that some habits are just to kind of keep things going. Whereas, so like exercise, for example, like you might create kind of arbitrary exercise goals, but at the end of the day, for most of us, the point of exercise is to stay healthy and happy and good energy and longevity, right? But that's not its ultimate purpose. The ultimate purpose is, well, what do you do with that energy, longevity, and health? Like that's just laying a foundation, right? It's not really, it's not so much fulfilling in and of itself, like unless you've got a life on top of it. So, and I think it's easy to, and it may be even important at some point, to just be building habits which are helping you with all this maintenance stuff. Like I want a good diet, and I want to stay on top of my exercise and meditation for my mental health, and I don't know, yoga or whatever. It's kind of like that can take quite a lot of effort and time to set up. And then you're still like, well, this is kind of just trying to keep me kind of happy enough so I can do other things. And so it has me think, well, how can we more utilize habits to also not just pursue this maintenance stuff, but pursue that feels like chipping away at steps towards bigger projects, I suppose.
Yeah. In kind of in the same way, I guess, to relate to if with like exercise, you had a goal to look at, you're like a bodybuilder,
right?
You knew that your daily like visit to the gym was moving you closer towards.
Yeah, if you're like an Olympian and the Olympics were coming up, then this wouldn't apply. Well, their exercise would be working to a bigger purpose and vision and goal, to some sense of to some project they were working on that was their one thing. And so that would be an example of a habit that was actually not just maintaining something, but building up to something with some sort of payoff. And an example of this, a friend of mine's writing a novel, right? So we got this habit of writing 100 words a day at the moment. And so clearly each 100 words he writes is getting closer and closer to having a novel at the end. So that is a very clear example of a habit that ends up with a final project.
Which would feel kind of satisfying knowing that, and also that if you kind of stuck to that no matter what, that it became this sort of non-negotiable. I think someone's kind of going through my mind, and I can't remember the exact quote around it, but it's basically saying like that there's a point in which your like planning and maintenance goals can kind of get in the way of productivity. If you spend more time planning and kind of making sure you're doing all these things just to be okay, you might actually just be kind of avoiding doing the thing that's sort of moving you forwards as well. So that's something I've become aware when I'm really honing in on my habits. Like if I just want to just kind of get those in place, I'm like, well, what am I actually doing with the spare time? And I think that's what I'm trying to do by blocking out specific time to do things rather than just sort of like a morning and evening routine shouldn't be like what I do in my spare time. You know, the routine is just the way you live your life, like essentially, like
right. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that, especially when it's a struggle to get the thing up and going in the first place. And it's kind of I think that there's a point. I guess we've gone through maybe the last few months. Me and our friend have sort of tried to implement maybe more solid routines and habits and that sort of thing. And there's kind of like a real enjoyment in doing that. Like there's like that's the challenge. It's like, the end goal is like set up these habits to the point where they're so ingrained that like it feels odd to not do a 10-minute meditation or not to write in like my journal on the way to work or something, you know, like that. And you kind of get there and then you're like, okay, what's like the next thing? Like I guess that's where these books on productivity become really helpful. It's like, but you also need to work out what you want to do with that time. What's exactly. Yeah. If some of the stuff you're working on is for health, energy, focus, attention, clarity, mental health, then that's awesome. But once you get there, it kind of begs the question of, what am I going to do with this health, energy, mental clarity, mental health? Like what
if there's something specific within that you want to work on, then like, you know, it might be, I don't know, you can imagine there'd be certain goals around, you know, like I want to work on this aspect of my mental health or this issue I'm working through in my mind and stuff like, then you'd give time specifically to that. But then if you're talking about just like general well-being and like making sure you kind of get to bed on time and, you know, you're meditating, it's the different things. It's an interesting thing to think about, I suppose, isn't it? That's kind of, I guess the one thing encourages you to like go big and be like, well, what's the big thing I'm actually aiming for here? And like trying to narrow that down into like, well, if that's what I want, then what's the best way to spend my time? Yeah. And
I think for me, it's going to be around like, or at least in sort of work life, writing some sort of courses or workshops around either I've got a few ideas spinning around, but maybe 4 fellow therapists, or maybe for some sort of program that could be helpful for someone either before they start therapy, or if they can't really afford to do therapy weekly, but they want their own sort of program they can follow, something like that. That's kind of my bigger vision that I've been inspired through reading this book. Things like that, sort of, they're a little bit, the novel example is really nice because it's quite clear that you can sustain one single habit, writing X amount of words, and you'll eventually hit your goal. But not all projects are like that, right? Some projects require multiple different goals within them that have different tasks. They're not all just one task that you can just pursue. So that has its own planning, which actually, so go on.
Oh no, you go. I think.
Well, it just reminds me, in this section on actual practice, he talks about blocking time, but he prioritizes. Well, first, look at your year and block out your holidays. I found that interesting. He was like, so like, when you're going to have time off because you're so kind of sure about your commitment to your one thing that you're going to have to need a break from it. So first block out your holiday days, and then like block out, your sort of time blocks to do your one thing, but also block out your planning time in getting things done. They'd call this your weekly review, right? But like block out an hour a week, for example, where you reconsider your someday vision, your 5-year vision, your 1-year vision, your 1 month goal that fits with that, your 1 week goal that fits with that, and what you're doing today, and just make sure you realign it, re-navigate the sat nav to make sure you're on that track. And it's almost like, you need to book in time to remember to do that, so you're not just off in the wilderness chipping away at stuff that's not really in line with what you want to achieve.
I like what he says around time blocking your time off. So your holidays means that we plan our work around our downtime. So like flipping on its head, not being like, it's like, I have evenings and weekends free, and then in the other time I do work. I go to paid work. I find that quite an interesting like reframe of doing things, because I think often maybe it's a bit of a habit for maybe people who kind of work regular hours, or maybe it's changing now, but it's sort of like you kind of work 9 to 5, come home, and then like, I don't know, have dinner, watch TV, go to bed, start again. Weekends are free to kind of just go and do whatever. But actually, like, there's so much time in the day. Like, if you had something specific you were really wanting to work on in the evenings, I'll probably describe this terribly, but like, there's like 4 or 5 hours in the evening you could do stuff you wanted to work on. You could pursue other dreams, other goals, other things. The weekends are, time for you to work on all these other things as well. I guess it's sort of, if work becomes a priority and like the main drainer of your energy, that you don't have energy for the things that really matter in your life, presuming that work might not be the most important thing to you.
That begs a whole host of questions, doesn't it? Like, I suppose how to perhaps work towards making the way you earn money more in line with this one thing. He doesn't really go into that, but like, I imagine, it would be, let's say, like, for lots of people, you're doing a job essentially just for the money. Then it would be so hard to implement this book around that, because you could obviously, you could find, like you're saying, but finding a few hours in the evening after, when you think about what you said about willpower draining through the day, like, it would be a slog. And again, like, I'm repeating myself, but I think the reason he doesn't address that is there's sort of an assumption that your job is your one thing, and that, so that I suppose that makes this book somewhat inaccessible for large amounts of people. It needs some sort of bridging project to get from where you're at to the point in which you could implement this book.
All right. Any other thoughts at all, or feel like we covered a fair bit there? Anything that kind of stood out to you that we haven't covered, or?
Let me just spin around and look at my whiteboard.
The productivity whiteboard. is good for the listener.
So one or two things which are basically covered in the 4-hour work week, like being able to say no and set your environment up that really helps you pursue your one thing, you know, like even recommends like getting a do not disturb sign. And okay, here's a thing that's a bit, I suppose, that I found really helpful. Finding ways to say no to the stuff that's not important from doing the getting things done. So I do an example of doing your taxes, right? The worst thing in the world is getting to like the day before your taxes are due and then like starting your taxes, like just having a massive box of receipts and doing this horrible project into the night to get it handed in by midnight or whatever. You don't want to be that person.
No.
But you can flip the other way where, like, for example, I had something like, you know, update my tax return as an ongoing habit in my system. I think I had it in maybe weekly, right? And then, and that's just one example of, maybe I've got loads of things like that. Update, so this and that. And then it ends up with, I got all these daily to-dos that pop up into my system because I've set weekly, bi-weekly, whatever. And actually it's like, well, do I need to do all this admin this frequently? Maybe I could update my tax return once a month. I certainly don't want to do it once a year, but maybe once a week is just like wasting my time. And like maybe actually there's so much stuff that I've implemented in my system, so I'm on top of everything, that I can now just start cutting out and experiment with. Let's see how it feels to I don't know, update my tax return every 2 months. Like maybe, yes, it will take much longer, but maybe a couple of hours once every 2 months is better than half an hour a week, you know?
Yes. Okay.
I don't know. Yeah. So things like that.
Because it's also like kind of in, if you are blocking out specific time to do things, like could you do 4 weeks worth in a shorter amount of time equivalent? Like if you're doing it weekly, if it's taking you like an hour each week, it's not going to take you 4 hours at the end of the month to do that hour.
Exactly.
As an example. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've got so many things like that, like, logging my client hours, for example, which I do for my governing body membership. It's kind of like, I also had that in as just a weekly to do. I suppose like weeks, we run on weeks, right? So it's easy to drop in things and just be like, I'll do it once a week without really thinking about it. And it's the same thing. I don't want to do it at the end of the year because that'd be a nightmare. But like, do I have to do it once a week? I'll try it every fortnight. I'll try it once a month. And suddenly, like, by finding these sweet spots for all these little maintenance tasks, I'm actually clearing a lot of my daily to-dos. And being and having much more free time without any negative impact on what I'm getting done. So I found that really helpful.
Yeah. That's really good. Yeah. And it means having like a really good understanding of how long things take, what energy that's going to take from you, what time of week's a good time to do that. Like, is it like a Sunday, the last Sunday of the month, you get all of that done? Or is it like first thing on a Monday? When's it good? When do you feel most satisfied about getting those things complete? That makes total sense. I think that's something you have to be kind with yourself, that you kind of learn over time. Like you learn that like, I wasn't doing that in the most efficient way. And it's good to reflect that like what I'm doing right now might not be the best way of doing things, and like there's another way of doing it, and kind of being open. I guess that's why these books are so interesting, because they show you anher way of doing things, and you try it and it works or it doesn't. And and in terms of his the part of his sentence, what's the one thing you can do that would make it either easier or unnecessary? Like that really applies to this stuff, right? Like, can I even I don't know, I'm just spitballing now, but would there be a way of utilizing some piece of software such that my filling in client hours automatically updates on my tax return, and then I don't even have to do it that just becomes automated. So like there are obviously it's not just all about automation, but there are ways in which you can quote say no to stuff and like take on less commitments, but still get the stuff done. got lots of examples in my head of ways I've kind of like streamlined areas in my life. Like I used to kind of every week sit down and write down my workouts I was going to do in the gym the next week.
Right.
Then I just got an app and just put it in once, and now it just.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's yeah. Awesome, mate. Well, yeah, really, really great to chat to you about that one. I think, I think we kind of got a bit of a flow, and there's plenty of content there, and really interesting book, and it's quite highly recommended by quite a number of people. So,
yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I think it's going to be one that's going to, it's full of big ideas, so it's not something I can read and then come to a podcast and be like, oh, I've implemented all this, but it's certainly going to be one that's going to marinate in my mind for quite a while, I think.
Nice. Okay, well, there we go. The next book will be up on screen now, and we'll see you in a few weeks. But great to chat to you, mate, again, and hope you're doing well, and looking forward to the next one.
Cheers, mate. Enjoyed it.
See you, mate.
Bye.
Bye.